everybody, and welcome to the Wench Bench, where friends sit and talk about fabulous fictional females and how their stories have influenced us throughout our lives. My name is Fonda.
And my name is Alison.
Today, we're doing something different because, as you can tell from the title, this is a bonus episode.
Yeah.
Today, Alison's going to be talking about tropes. Now, fair warning, dear listeners, this will be very ranty, not a very positive episode like we really try to do. Obviously, we're not perfect human beings, but Alison has a few things she's been wanting to say for a while, and we thought, you know what? Some people like listening to people rant, so here we go.
Yes, it's my time to shine. So, as Fonda mentioned, there have been times in this podcast where there are things that come up to do with these female characters that just, hit me in a way that just pisses me off so much. And I don't want to necessarily include that, so I have 3 tropes for you today that I'm going to talk about that upset me so that I don't have to talk about them whenever I do an episode and that comes up. I just wanted to pop in here real quick at the top and post a bit of a content warning for our listeners. Some of the topics that we are discussing today get a little bit heavy in regards to the bury your gaze trope, as well as the fridging and violence against women tropes. So if those are topics that you might find triggering or uncomfortable, please make sure to put your mental health first, and if you find that it is making you uncomfortable, please stop, skip, whatever you gotta do what you gotta do. So, we're gonna get started with something on the lighter end of the spectrum of tropes that I dislike. Corporate feminism.
Is that the title of the trope?
Kind of.
Okay.
It's not necessarily a specifically named trope, but it is when they are trying to shove feminism down your throat and pat themselves on the back for it.
Okay.
So they're like, oh, hey, look it, we gave you this strong female character. And it's like, yeah, but you gave us one instead of multiples. For example, Avengers. We get Black Widow. We get one. And that brings us to my first rant, which is from the Avengers Endgame.
Okay.
Where, during the final battle scene, Mr. Peter Parker Spider-Man gets his hands on the gauntlet and he's having trouble, and then one of the female superheroes shows up and she's like, I'll help you, and then it's like, well, you don't have to help him alone, and then all of the other girl superheroes get this epic shot, and I was so divided on this scene because I loved it. I read all the A-Force comics, I love it, and it's just this little A-Force teaser that's like, look at all these cool female characters, but then we don't get to see them in their own movies. We don't get to see them have full storylines or full character arcs. They're not actually developing these female characters in a way to make them substantial, except for Miss Marvel. And I guess now Wanda. I haven't watched WandaVision yet, but she got relegated to a TV show. Black Widow's...
The movie hasn't come out yet for Black Widow, right?
The Black Widow movie has been in production hell for years. And you have all these cool, female characters, and then it's just look we're gonna give them this cool couple-minute fight scene in a movie that's 3 hours long. And that's all we get. The amount of screen time that Marvel has given to its female characters is abysmal. There are days worth of movies. Mm-hmm. And we have one starring female movie. We had one movie for a black superhero out of 23.
23!
Out of 23 fucking movies. We get one about a black superhero and we get one about a girl superhero. The fuck?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that whole scene, I was just like, oh, it's so cool. I get to see them all fighting together, working as a team. And then also I'm like, why don't we have a movie like this? And you know that that there were people in the production team who were putting that scene together who were just like, oh yeah, look at the great job we're doing. Look at this great female representation we're putting on screen. And it's like, it's not enough. Period. It's not enough.
Yep. If any of you could see Alison's facial expressions, it's a ride.
It's a ride.
Let me tell you.
And this isn't the first time Marvel's fucked up in this kind of way. About 5 years ago, they tried to do a Celebrating Women in Comics month, but it was literally women in the comics. So female characters. And all of the fans were like, so why don't you have women creators? Why don't you have women artists? Why don't you have women writers? Why don't you have any diversity? And it was made extra bad because a couple months before that, they had done a bunch of hip-hop covers, which was extremely appropriative of Black culture. And they also have abysmal numbers of Black creators and Black writers and Black artists. And so they're so like socially blind to what they're doing. They're just like, no, this is what you want. It's like, no, we want action. We don't want pandering. We want you to say that you actually believe in supporting diversity in your creative teams and in your comics. And we want you to deliver. Not just say it. Like,
and not just showing us in a fictional world either.
Yeah, because it's all lip service, which is the worst thing that comes out of like large corporations, is that they're just like, look at us, we're helping, we're doing a good job. And it's like, but you're not. You should be out seeking different writing staff because it makes these things better. And they should also be fighting because there's been plenty of stories that have come out in the past 5 years about why it is that there is not more diversity. And it's because they do not protect those people who are hired. They have to face racism, they have to face the boys club, they have to face sexism, sexual harassment, all sorts of things like that come out of it because these companies feel like they need to protect their golden boys. Those creators who have the big names, which I'm not going to name any because I don't want to get sued. We don't want to get sued.
I don't. Yeah, no, I'm good. Thank you.
But they're like, well, no, we have to protect this guy because he's earned us a bunch of money. It's like, yeah, but he's a piece of shit. You really want that to be your creative team. And that's what they've decided. And so that's why, like, I vote with my dollar in regards to a lot of comics that I buy. That's a part of the big reason why I don't buy that many comics anymore. Because I only
Alison
go for ones.
used to buy a lot of comics.
Yeah, tons.
Yeah.
I have so many. But now I only get them from actual diverse creators. And I look and see who is making these characters. I pretty much solely read female starring comics. I don't really have any that have like male protagonists in them. It's just because I also connect with those stories better. Like what Amanda Connor did with Power Girl and what she did with Harley Quinn. I connect with it more because for most of our lives we have been reading coming of age stories by a white man. Or like the guy who created Miles Morales is a white dude and he's trying to write a coming of age story for a biracial, possibly queer child. And it's just like, could this story not have been told by somebody who has experiences closer to the character? Could you have not cooperated with somebody in that way? Like, did that guy really need to tell that story instead of maybe pushing somebody else up and giving somebody else an opportunity?
Or working with.
Exactly, like partnering with, those kinds of things. So just generally for corporate feminism, I'm kind of just over this fight to try and prove that basically 50% of your audience deserve to be represented. Mm-hmm. We should be past this. We shouldn't be fighting for representation for women. We should be on to fighting for representation for people of color, for the queer community, for the trans community. Like, we should be fighting for bigger things. But now everybody is trying to fight together. So now not only are we fighting for more female representation, we're also fighting for people of color, we're fighting for trans, and so that fight should be done and over with. And so we should all be able to focus on other things. And it's unfortunate and sad, but it's kind of brought a bunch of people together, which is sort of a good thing, but also unfortunate that we can't be further along.
I agree. That's why there's a lot of indie comic book companies, or like in quote unquote indie companies in general, whether it's like an animation studio, whether it's like a publishing company, what have you. There's a lot of other companies that are hiring and doing those things because it's what they want, because it's like the founders are like, why isn't this happening? Well, if it's not happening, I'm gonna do it.
Yeah.
But it can be really hard for them to compete with the big companies like Marvel and DC that have been around for a long time. It can be hard.
Yeah. That's why I do try. So if you listeners do know of any more independent companies that do other comics, that have other things, I would love some recommendations and stuff for trade paperbacks and stuff. Dark Horse is, they're, I believe, a subsidiary of DC, but those little smaller sections of them are doing a better job.
Yeah.
Which is why I tend to kind of drift more towards those now. Just takes some looking, some searching.
Yeah.
That's it for the corporate feminism one. I've been waiting for that Avengers rant for a while. Next is a little less ranty and a little bit more just unfortunate, and something that I haven't come to yet in my topics, but it does involve some characters that I want to talk about in the future, so I kind of just want to get it out of the way.
Okay.
And it's the bury your gays trope.
Yes, I am sure many are familiar. Well, not many. I'm guessing there are a lot of listeners who are familiar in some capacity with the bury your gays trope.
It's definitely becoming more of a mainstream, it's definitely becoming more recognized in the mainstream communities. But basically, people who are LGBTQ plus are statistically more likely to die in media than straight people.
Yeah.
And this can be read in many different ways, including the idea that their lives are less important and therefore more disposable, or that they are somehow being punished for not being straight, or simply because for a long time, queer characters were often the villain, and therefore their death is considered a positive part of the story. So by having these characters killed off so often, it's sending all of these negative messages to the audience, and a lot of times to young viewers who are possibly grappling with their queer identity. And it's really unfortunate, and it's a really negative thing to see on television. A part of the reason too is that when there is a queer character, because they're so rare, a lot of the people who identify with that character identify with them so strongly that it's even harder when they die. It hurts that extra little bit more, because not only have you lost a character that you like, you've lost the character that you identify the most with.
Yeah. I remember that there was a conversation floating around, and it started on Tumblr, and I was kind of looking at it in other places, and it started with the fandom for Critical Role. There were a lot of people recently being like in the last few months for Campaign 2, who are really worried about more, or the continuation of certain gay characters dying that are NPCs for Critical Role. And in that discussion, I remember there were people that were expressing that, like, it is... Okay, and again, this is me paraphrasing what I'm trying to remember, but this one person who was expressing their opinion on Tumblr was talking from their perspective as someone who is part of the LGBTQ plus community, that it's not that people don't understand that gay people can't die. Anyone can die.
Yeah.
This person was saying that, like, yes, in media, gay, in a television show, in a movie, in a video game, like, anyone can die, and that includes a character who is LGBTQ or queer. But it's how it's done that can cause the issue. Because a lot of people were targeting and going for various players, and I think at the time Matthew Mercer, being like, hey, you can't do another, like, you can't kill more gay people, you can't kill more queer people in the show. And someone's like, but this isn't coming from a place of like there's still stories that have to be told.
Yeah.
And it's not like anyone's going to do certain things on purpose, but to completely avoid trying to tell a story of any kind. Wait, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to say this because it's not from my own perspective. But I guess what I'm trying to ask you, Alison, is for
how can you kill a gay character?
No, I don't want to know how to do that. Like, a lot of people get upset and they automatically say, like, you're burying your gays, you're doing that trope. But at what point do you think there's actually going to be a difference where that trope is invalid going forward, right? Because no one wants to have the queer characters be offed in these ways that you've just talked about, right? They're the villains, so they're dead, and we should be happy. They're dead because it was their queerness, or blah, 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 or they're dead because of any reason that's not besides just them being part of a tragic world, and they just happen to be a character that died in that tragic world. Like, if they were to be in an Aliens movie, right? We don't want them to be the first to die, because it's like, well, there goes our representation for the whole movie. But in the Aliens franchise, everybody dies in that franchise, right? It just happens. Everybody's dead.
Yeah.
So, to me, would you say that they have to put in better thought and understanding into the reasons, into the how, into the why that these characters who are queer die?
Yeah, so the barrier gaze trope kind of branches into a lot of different other ones, like the too good for this world trope, the dead lesbian trope, which is a little bit more specific to what a couple examples that I have.
Yeah.
But basically one of the big issues that I see, and that I've read a lot of people online see, is the fact that a lot of these characters are, like, massively underwritten. So their queerness is their only defining trait, and they never get a story beyond that, and then they just get killed off. There's ways for these things to make sense in the story if a gay character does die, but a lot of times it's just senseless. In something like a horror movie, you kind of expect everybody to die. Yeah. It just is what it is. Unfortunately, a lot of times the person of color or the queer person is killed off earlier than everybody else, which is pretty shitty. But the first one that I want to talk about that kind of ties into this is the character of Tara from Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Okay.
So Buffy's best friend, Willow, is a witch, and discovers that she likes girls. She's dated boys, so I don't think it's ever particularly decided whether she was bisexual or lesbian. Bisexual in the 90s was a confusing term and was unfortunately very misunderstood and misrepresented. But she ends up dating another witch who's named Tara. And the two of them have this great relationship, and Tara kind of becomes a part of the gang, and she helps fight evil, and everything is really fun. And then, essentially in a senseless act of gun violence, Tara dies in front of Willow as a way to drive Willow to become Dark Willow, because she lost this person that she loves. It's like Tara's life needed to end in order for us to explore this story. And it's like, you couldn't have come up with another way to do that. Or Tara she kind of just got punked. They did her so dirty. She didn't even die fighting. She died by accident. And it was so tragic, and it was so sad. And to have this, like, iconic show from the 90s, like, Buffy was huge. And to have, like, an actual lesbian relationship in it that's actually like a thing, it's in canon, it's being shown, it's being represented, and then to have that taken away in such a senseless and insensitive way. It happens like that so often. So many of these queer characters are killed with little consideration, which I think is where a lot of that pain comes from, is that their deaths don't necessarily seem to have any weight for the writers or the creators.
Okay.
Like, it has weight for the characters in the show because a lot of times they're being killed in order to tell the story or to push it forward. But, like, the writers almost didn't give them the chance to be killed in a good way, which is so fucked up for me to be like, how can you kill a character well? I remember when I rewatched Buffy, I was just like, fuck. Like, Tara's so cool. I love Tara. I'm totally gonna do an episode on her. She's so badass, and it's just like, it was heartbreaking that she was killed off just so that they could tell a story about angsty, angry Willow when there could have been 100 different reasons why Willow drifted into the dark side of witch and magic and all of that. Like, you didn't have to kill her girlfriend.
Yeah.
The reason tropes are tropes is because they're easy. It's easy to tell these stories. It's easy to fall back into these tropes and these things that have happened over and over and over again because you don't have to try and come up with a different story. And that's the unfortunate part. And I think I'm not, like, obviously here speaking for the way all queer people feel about this trope. I'm incapable of doing that.
Yeah. But,
like, this is how I read that trope. This is how watching those characters die makes me feel. And it does. Like, it just feels senseless and pointless, and it just feels like lazy writing. And that's the thing that I hate the most, is lazy writing. Like, you're getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to create something. Like, try a little harder. Especially when dealing with something that Joss Whedon is problematic, and we're not going to get into him today. But when you're dealing with mostly white, cis, het creators, you need that outside experience. Like, you need to reach out more, basically. And that's what I am hoping is starting to be seen in a lot more media, where we're starting having more voices around the table, like you talked about in the General Amaya?
Yep.
In the General Maya episode, is having deaf people around the table to increase the believability and the reality of that character. Have more queer people in the writing rooms. I've said this probably a million times, but I'm going to say it a million more. That's how you write better characters, is you have people who understand or who have lived those experiences, and you listen to them, and you do your best to include their opinions and their criticisms and to make your art better. One of the people that I wanted to mention that did this and who tried to make it right was the McElroy brothers. In their podcast, The Adventure Zone, which is a D&D actual play podcast. So in the third arc of this campaign, there are two characters that are queer, probably lesbian. Again, no specific labels were given. But these characters were named Hurley and Sloane. And at the end, spoilers, at the end of the arc, Hurley sacrifices herself in order to save everybody and in order to save the woman that she loves. And rather than living on without her, Sloane also dies with her, and they become a tree because of magic.
Yeah. D&D does that.
Yeah, because of magic. It's not, specifics are not important. But these two queer characters died. And it was, I believe, the first queer characters, officially, canonically, in the show. If not NPCs, because I know one of the player characters ends up becoming gay, but that I don't think was necessarily decided at this point in the show. But these were the first two. And then to have them die, the audience and the listeners, it was a beautiful story, and it was sad, and it was heartbreaking, but the listeners were like, what the fuck? did you not know that this is a thing that we constantly have to go through? And then the McElroy brothers heard this and they're like, holy shit, we hadn't realized that this was a trope, because it's not super well known. Unless you're affected by something, a lot of times you don't realize that it's problematic. They end up kind of retconning it later that they became dryads, which they tried to fix it. But I think the fact that they are open to learning and open to those criticisms and open to trying to change is very important for a lot of creators who are kind of delving into those things, because I'm not here saying that if you haven't lived that experience, you don't get to write about it.
Yeah.
Like, that's not fair of me to say, or to try and force people to not be able to explore those stories, but go at it from a place of sensitivity and love and the ability to learn and be open. And I think that that's what they did. And it's good to see that somebody was trying. Yeah. It's just such a sad trope, and it makes me so sad.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel bad with maybe I wasn't able to explain my thought or question earlier. I think I just wanted to understand, because I've seen people who are queer and LGBTQ and trans that are not telling people queer people can't die. While as there's a lot of more, I'm going to say, people who are hurt that just want the trope to be gone completely. And for some people that's like saying, well, then we're never going to get the good stories, right? Like, everybody wants those good stories without the tropes.
Yeah.
But constantly being afraid of being like, I'm having this story and I've written it, or I've thought of it in my head, or I'm drawing it out, and I put in a lot of thought and effort into killing this one character, but then to be like holding back the decision in a way can be weird. Like you said, like you don't want somebody to offhandedly just kill a character without putting genuine thought into it. Or kind of like hey, my wife's in the fridge. That's dumb trope. Oh, I gathered. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want those things where a death is just going to cause another character to do X, Y, Z. You want something to be more meaningful than to just make another character do a choice or a bad decision. So I find it very interesting seeing the LGBTQ community go back and forth when it comes to the bury your gay trope. So I appreciate that you were expressing to me your personal opinions on it and how you view it, because I don't know how to stand on it, in the sense that, like, I don't want it. Like, I don't want those stories to be told in an unthoughtful way.
Yeah.
But also, I want to see the good stories be told. And sometimes those good stories do have death. Yeah. And if death is avoided, I'm never going to see the good story. It's so weird calling it a good story, but I'm never going to... I want to see well-told stories of different people of color, of queer people who are grieving in a way that seems believable.
Yeah. And a lot of times it has to do with just the sheer numbers, like statistically. Yeah. It's like, if we had more gay characters, it wouldn't be as statistically awful to kill some of them in a understandable way. But because there is so little representation, getting rid of it and killing it hurts more. Yeah. Which is it kind of leads into a lot of the issues with my final trope, which is using violence against women as a plot device. There are a million tropes under this header, which is awful. But the number one thing Fonda mentioned earlier is fridging. Fridging is when someone that a main character cares about, usually a female love interest, is killed and then left for them to find. The first example of this, and why it is called fridging, happened with Green Lantern / Kyle Rayner's girlfriend, who was literally murdered and stuffed into a fridge for him to find. And the really tough part about this trope, I find, is because you literally know nothing about this character. You maybe get her name. And, like, she only exists as it pertains to the male character. She's just a dead body, and it's offensive and inappropriate, and it treats women as objects. It's so overused, and that's why I think it's starting to get more and more frustrating now, because we have seen it for so long. The term was originally popularized by comic book writer Gail Simone through her website Women in Refrigerators. She made this website in 1999. It definitely still looks like it's from 1999. I went to it. It's incredible. But there's literally just a list of superheroines who have been either depowered, raped, or cut up and stuck in a refrigerator. A couple honorable mentions from this list for characters.
Oh my god, honorable mentions?
Honorable mentions.
No.
This list is so long. Like, it's obnoxiously long.
No.
Multiple versions of Black Canary. All sort of horrible things happen to her. Like, tons of horrible things. Gwen Stacy, killed so that Spider-Man can be sad. Huntress, also there. Starfire had bad stuff happen to her. Power Girl had bad stuff happen to her. Wonder Woman had bad stuff happen to her. And, like, the list goes on. And one of the worst ones is Karen Page. Some of you may know her as Daredevil's girlfriend from the Daredevil TV show. She's portrayed in that. And they wrote her as addicted to drugs. And then she got into porn. And then she contracted HIV. And then she died. Her whole life was horrible. All to drive Daredevil's story forward. And just horrible things happening to her. And at one point, she, I believe, sells his secret identity for drugs. It's just, they sell her out. They do her completely dirty, and they just, because she's kind of disposable. She's treated as disposable in the comics. And it's so sad, because she can be a very interesting character.
As seen by the TV
appropriate
show.
Writing. As seen by the TV show, they did really quite interesting things with her in that I found her character much more well-rounded, much more interesting.
Complex.
Much more complex. And those mentions are just in comics. That's not even jumping into movies. That's not jumping into TV. That's not going anywhere else. Like, just comics. So this is how big this trope is it's just massive. So this idea of killing off usually underwritten and underdeveloped female characters is so overdone because it's so effective. Mm-hmm. And men are arguably more expendable to the audience. We tend to care more about the death of a woman. And it's used as a trick to emotionally manipulate the audience into caring about the male protagonist. And you see this a lot with people will talk about how shows where children have harm done to them hits harder when you have children. Shows where a wife gets killed hits harder if you're married. It's a cheap trick to get you to care quickly without having to try. This brings me to the biggest reason I wanted to do this, because I want to talk about some female characters that this man has made popular.
Okay.
And I don't want to have to talk about this man ever again.
Okay.
Quentin Tarantino.
Okay.
Quentin Tarantino, I believe, is the most prolific offender of using this trope as a lazy writing tool. I have not seen one of his films where he has not portrayed brutal violence against women. It is done in so many of them. And I like Kill Bill. I like those movies. Just hearing about things after everything came out during Me Too with Harvey Weinstein, who's like the producer of a lot of Quentin Tarantino's movies, and how through a lot of the things that had happened, he just was kind of making excuses for Weinstein and his actions towards women. And he stood up a couple times. I'm not sure. It's all really muddy and confusing. But finding out that in the movie, he was the one who spit on Uma Thurman. He also used his own hands to choke her in the movie. And, like, there's nothing illegal or wrong about what he's doing because he's the director and he wants to get the right shot. But it squicks me out. Like, it gives me gross feelings to know that he is so often portraying this violence. It just, like, I don't like what that makes me think about him.
Yeah.
And so it makes those shows harder to watch. Even if I do enjoy some of them. For me, as a person, I also believe that there's a lot of publications and a lot of things and a lot of certain type of people who laud him for his creativity, blah, 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 all that, saying how he's the best director in the whole entire world. And I just don't see it. I see his reliance on this trope as proof that he is not as amazing as everybody says that he is. A bunch of people, this is probably going to piss a bunch of people off. I know that. I don't like him. You can like him all you want. I don't give a shit.
Yeah.
He does have...
entitled to their own opinion and feelings.
Yeah. Yes. Everybody's entitled to their own feelings. Shortly after the whole Me Too thing, my husband and I watched The Hateful Eight. Not sure if you've seen that movie, Fonda.
I don't even know what it is.
Not sure if my listeners have, but there is one female character in this story, and she's basically beaten up the whole movie. She's an outlaw, and a guy is trying to take her in to get money. And he just beats the shit out of her a bunch of times while she's in handcuffs. He smashes her face into a table. He does all of these horrible things to her. And it's like, she's not a good person, but also just the visuals, the optics of, I believe it's 8 male characters and 1 woman in chains.
Yeah.
Being brutalized. It's a lot when you kind of take in the rest. And I can't, after having opened up myself to learning more about this trope, to trying to watch media with a more critical lens, I can't shut that out anymore. It's just hard because he does have movies I liked. Like I said, Kill Bill. I love Django Unchained. That's such a fun movie. Inglourious Bastards is good too. Like, he's done some really good movies, but it leaves that bitter taste in my mouth.
Yeah.
Having that idea in my mind that's like, just watch how much he beats up women in his movies. And it's like,
no,
it's hard to deny.
I can understand that. Like, to bring in an interesting conversation we all had from a D&D game Alison and I are in, and I'm the DM for, there are a handful of fictional characters whom are female in the game that I DM as an NPC who have been, like, I don't portray it on screen for the characters to see it as a game, but they'll come up and they'll be, like, one of the characters is in sort of like a thieves alliance, and she helps one of the main player characters and ends up getting seen with him, and this other really bad thieves guild that like has no morals, doesn't give a fuck, ends up capturing her because just through rolls of a die they are tracking him down, and they're like, oh, hey, this is the first time we've seen you interact with someone. It happened to be her. So I'm like, okay, she ended up getting kidnapped in the story, and they were trying to get information out of her. And then Alwyn, the main character, ended up, not main character, but his character found out, and then everyone in the game did go, she's okay. She didn't get killed or anything, but like, they were seedy people, and they did beat her, and the characters saw her in the state. And it was really hard for me to do that with those roles. And as a DM, you don't have to do things if the roles don't work out. But it was just interesting when I heard everyone at the table talking about it, how they're like, well, Fawn and Alison, you guys really dislike these tropes. You really dislike these things. Fonda, why are you having this happen with these female characters? And I was like, I get where you're coming from 1,000,000%.
Mm-hmm.
But I also can't deny certain stories being told, if that makes sense. Like, there is a right and a wrong way to portray violence of any kind.
Yes. 100%.
And I feel like I wanted to try to do that in the sense of, I was like, there's this female character who is going to off screen go through some stuff because I don't know how to portray it on screen for the characters to see. I don't want to. I felt like I wouldn't have done it well. But at the same time, I'm like, this is the story you guys are all navigating through. You're going to come across people of any kind that are going to be in this really shitty state.
Yeah.
And I don't know. How did you feel about it, to bring to that question? Because you're a player in that perspective.
Well, in my opinion, the handling of this trope and the handling of violence against women in media comes down to agency and portrayal. It comes down to how it is handled. Did that woman have agency in her, not necessarily what was done to her, but in the after effects? Do you explore how that affected her as a person? Are you focusing on her? Whereas I feel the trope is more when you use it and you don't actually explore it.
Okay.
Because it is something that happens. It's something that we cannot deny. The amount of violence that has been done to women and like weaker communities is astronomical and horrible. And a lot of creators, especially female creators, especially like diverse creators, use the exploration of these horrible real things as a sort of catharsis, as a way to work through trauma and experience and real problems in a way where you have control of it. Yeah, it comes down to, for me, that agency and that understanding. For example, rape revenge films. It's a big thing in horror, pretty self-explanatory. But when it started in the 70s, that person who got raped was never really the one who got vengeance. And when she was the one who got vengeance, it was always focusing on the violence and the vengeance. It never focused on her emotional journey, on her trauma, on how it was that she was growing from this, how she handled it. And now there are movies that have come out that have been lauded for the way that they have handled it, the way that they have focused on not just the outer effects of such a traumatic experience, but what goes on inside.
Yeah.
And those have been told by people who have experienced those things, or by people who can kind of closer connect with somebody who has experienced those things. It does make a huge difference on the lens and the handling and kind of everything around it.
Yeah. Similar
to with the barrier gaze trope. When you are given nothing more than this woman has been violated. Like, and how did she deal with that? How did this affect her? Not how did her violation affect somebody else? That can be a part of it too. That can be explored. I'm not saying that that's not allowed. But like when you completely disregard her experience and her feelings and you use her as a prop and as an object and as a reason, it's different. Yeah. And it just, for me, again, like so many of these things are just how I deal with these these things that I watch, because I do watch a lot of horror. I have watched rape revenge films. I have watched that kind of stuff. And it can be really cathartic, really healing, really emotional and done well. But it can also be extremely mishandled.
Yeah.
And that can almost go the other way. Whereas one way can lead towards healing and understanding, the other way can lead towards re-traumatization and more hurt and pain, which is the important part. I realized I forgot a quote that I really wanted to include that kind of, it summarizes a lot of the new way that we're starting to handle rape revenge things. So the quote is, "More and more stories are being brought to screen focusing on what a rape survivor needs, rather than who her father wants to punch. This is an industry realizing when a woman is raped, it is a tragedy because that woman is a human being, not because she's a daughter." That is by Isabella Austin from theconversation.com. It wraps up the difference between it being a trope and it being a story.
That's a really good quote.
It is, right? Like, when I read it, I was just like, fuck.
Yeah.
Yes. Accurate and concise. Not like my ramblings. I also apologize if I laughed at any appropriate times. I laugh when I am uncomfortable. It's a coping mechanism of mine that I need to work on for this podcast.
I totally get what you mean.
Because my friends understand why I'm laughing, and I realize that not everybody who listens to this is going to know who I am on a personal level, so.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, it's hard. And leads me back to basically the through line of this entire episode, which is representation behind the creation of these things. In a movie called Cam, that I'm pretty sure I've talked about before,
yep,
there was a woman who wrote it. It's about a cam girl. It's a horror movie. It's great. There were 2 times when she particularly remembers stepping up to the male director. And she chose this male director because she'd worked with him before and because she trusted him. And so there was one time where they were framing a shot and it was supposed to be on a bow tie. But when she looked at it, she said, "That's looking at her boobs." And he, even though he wasn't thinking about it, by putting a different set of eyes on it, he's like, "Oh, okay." And he reset the scene and he relit it and he made sure that they could include her face in the shot. Because it was originally just like her décolletage, which was very busty, unlike sexual. But because he doesn't have the experience of being objectified that way, he didn't think about it that way. And then the other one, I might have told this story before, but when a girl was going to take her shirt off, some of the crew called for ice, because you're supposed to ice the nipples of naked women so that their nipples stand up, which is a sometimes violating process that some actresses have come out and been like, yeah, when this happened to me, it was a lot to deal with mentally and emotionally. And when she saw this happening, it took her a second, but then she's like, wait, why are we doing this? And as soon as she brought it up, as soon as she asked that one question, everybody else asked that question. They're like, fuck, why are we doing this? Like, why is this necessary? Because it isn't. But like, that different point of view was so important. And it changed so much. It's just so important. And I guess that's the positive part about this episode, is just me saying how there are stories. There are good moments. There are things where people talk about how having that different point of view in the writer's room or whatever has changed things for the better and have made this like the media that we consume and the things that we read more impactful and more understanding and more sensitive is a good word. Like, just handle with care these topics that for so long we have treated as throwaway. Like, yeah, killing people, it's just bring it back, like, because it's easy in fiction to just have it not be real.
Yeah.
But it can't, like, other people see it and they connect with it, and it should be handled with care and with understanding and with sensitivity, and it can be something really great. And I am excited to not have to bring up these very sad things in the future when I talk about some of these characters, because honestly, it's a heavy topic that unfortunately ends up in a lot of media and in a lot of things that we talk about. And I hope I didn't bring anybody too far down in my rabbit hole of rants and upsetness, but these are some things that I do feel very strongly about, that I feel had to be said somewhere.
Yeah.
In order for me to be able to more fully explore in places where I plan to go with female characters and stuff like that.
No,
I hope you liked it.
I appreciated the fact that we explored things that I wasn't comfortable with, if that makes sense. Because I am not a horror movie fan. I don't like partaking in that kind of stuff, mainly because of how I can't turn off the physical uncomfortableness I can get. And so there's going to be a lot of stories, a lot of characters that I'm not going to explore because that's just not where I like to... It's just, there's always going to be stories, there's always going to be genres that suit people more than others. Mm-hmm. And it's not that I don't want to hear or have those things be happen. That's just not where I am as a person. Like, I'm never going to be a scary movie person. I'm never going to understand the bad problematic tropes for those because I don't watch them. But it's really good that you made me... I'm really thankful that we have these conversations and you tell me your feelings and these perspectives that I don't quite understand. And that's all anything is for anybody, is if you don't understand something, but you want to be at a place where you're like, I understand that I don't understand. So let's have you tell me your feelings on this. It's not the be all end all, because at the end of the day, Alison's just giving me her experience for this particular thing. But I was thankful for it because I don't know how to... I didn't know about a lot of these things that we've been discussing in this episode. And Alison, to that point, I'm sorry if I wasn't able to articulate my questions well enough because I was trying really hard to figure out how to express my inner dialogue into a proper articulated sentence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's get something positive up in here. What are you excited about, Fonda?
Oh my gosh, Alison, I am excited. I have been watching I'm going to call it a web series because that's where it came out. A American multimedia franchise produced by Rooster Teeth Productions. Not sure if you're familiar with them at all, but it is a series called Ruby, spelt R-W-B-Y.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it was created by Monty Ohm, written and planned with Miles Luna and Carrie Shawcross, and I started watching it a while back at binging it, mainly because of some friends having arguments that I thought was, in my opinion, for lack of a better word choice, dumb. Sorry, my two friends who have strong feelings about certain things, but I, after watching it, have come to the conclusion that I disagree. But
just allowed.
Anyway,
you're allowed to disagree.
Yeah, it's allowed. But for anyone that doesn't know, it's like a future fantasy world called Remnant. And it's filled with ravenous monsters, treacherous terrain, and more villains than you can... And this is a quote by Rooster Teeth, than you can shake a sniper scythe at.
Is that a gun sword?
It's a scythe weapon in the series, and it can transform into a sniper.
Nice.
Like, it's one of those transformative weapons that can be popular.
Yeah, I dig it.
Yeah, it's a cool design. But basically, it's about these, like, young teenage girls named Ruby, Weiss, Blake, and Yang, which is where the R, W, the B, and the Y come from for Ruby. Mm-hmm. And they're training to be huntsmen and huntresses, and they're trying to, like, save this world. And I think it's really cool and unique. It took me a while to get into because I found the animation style a little bit hard for me to enjoy at first. Okay. But when I got over that, I really liked it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's cool. It's not perfect, but I have a blast watching it, and sometimes that's all I want from something is for me to be taken out of the real world and immersed into something that I can just have a good, fun time with.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I'm enjoying.
It's good. I've seen lots of cool stuff about that online.
Yeah. You can watch the first 7 volumes either on YouTube or on roosterteeth.com, and you can watch by episode for free.
Oh, cool. Good to know.
Yeah, so if you ever want to, check, Yeah. So, dear listeners, you can find us wherever podcasts can be found. Please make sure to rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. You can follow us on Tumblr, Twitter, and Instagram at Wench Bench Pod. And if you want to, you can reach out and send us an email at wenchbenchpod@gmail.com. All of the art for the Wench Bench was designed by the wonderful Tessa Joyce Riecken. You can find her on Twitter and Instagram at Werevile. Check out her Insta stories. I highly recommend. Lately, she's been spending a lot of time with dogs, and I've been loving it. Thank you so much, dear listeners, and hope to talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye. That other point, Alison, if you have to cut a lot of my shit out because it doesn't make sense, fucking go for it, please.